Welcome to The Twist. Today I have from Paris, Count Christian Andlau. You are president of Europa, you're a federalist, and it has been said that the Russia-Ukraine war ended globalization. The world is now breaking into regions, with Russia aligning with China, India, and other nations, and the EU with the US, Canada, and the UK. How will the globalist aim of Pan-Europa survive in this new order, especially since its vision included Russia, which you had informed me about?
Well, Erika, yes, I'm a European federalist, but certainly not a globalist, because the cultural and geopolitical compatibilities between us, the Europeans, the European Union and the USA, on one hand, and with Russia on the other hand, and even between the members of the EU, are enough of a headache. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm still a federalist, or rather in favor of a European confederation. As far as globalism is concerned, I think that only the methods of the Chinese dictatorship could enable a world government to survive. It seems to me that neither you nor I would want such a tyranny.
Well, it's interesting that you're saying a confederation and that you're now in favor of a confederation, but the European federalists want a federation and the European Union to be modeled along the lines of the United States, meaning that the nation states relinquish their sovereignty with decisions decided in Brussels. So how can you hold the federalist view and also be for a confederation, which is what more of your conservative or right-leaning parties are advocating?
Because federalism is only advocated by some elite in the European institutions. But the people, most people in Europe, are not in favor of federalism. So this is why I think that confederation would be more adapted to a democratic Europe.
So your input in Pan-Europa now, as well as within the Federalist Party, is more confederalist versus federalist. So I'm a little bit lost because the Federalists are, the ideology is ideally for a world federation and wanting to work through the global institutions. And there's also a very different thing happening in Europe now, where you're seeing more of Europe also make decisions that are good for Europe, and even moving away from some of the federalist ideology into more of this empire age that is upon us. But before I go forward, you had also stated to me that the vision had included Russia, this Pan-Europa vision. So how does your view now align with Pan-Europa?
Yes, that's true, because the aim of Pan-Europe was originally United States of Europe from San Francisco to Vladivostok.
Yes.
Of course, over the Atlantic Ocean, not the Pacific. That was in the words of our founder, Count Richard Kudnov-Kalergi in 1924. Of course, this aim is still remote and idealistic. So keeping it in mind, we're in fact just a think tank.
So it sounds like it's actually moved away from the original ideology.
And Pan-Europe, of which, as you said, I'm not the Secretary General anymore, but only the president in Alsace, with the European institutions in Strasbourg. This think tank is separate from my Federalist party. It has nothing to do with it. I'm in charge of both the Federalist Party in Alsace and the Pan-Europe think tank. But these are two different things.
And what is Pan-Europa right now contributing? What's its current contribution as far as ideas for the European project?
Well, it has helped several countries from Central Europe to apply for membership to the European Union. For instance, it has helped Croatia very much, Slovakia, and some other countries.
Okay, so it's more recent. So it's still following in the footsteps of the the now deceased Archduke Otto von Habsburg, who brought in the various Eastern Bloc nations. And it sounds like it's still following that path with membership, although the membership is on hold at the moment.
Yes, so you just mentioned the Habsburg Empire, and important parts of the Ukraine were parts of that Habsburg Empire. So we're quite ready now to help Ukrainians apply to the European Union and fill in their forms, etc. But this is still too soon.
Yes, Ursula von der Leyen went and met with Zelensky to fast track. Do you think that Ukraine will be fast tracked to membership of the EU? Do you think that's possible?
Well, first of all, this war has to come to an end.
Yes, and your President Macron has actually stated that. That's his position as well.
Yes, it is.
The membership cannot take place with a nation that is currently in war. And what is the reasoning behind that?
Because we cannot afford to import a war within the European Union.
That's not been elaborated on. I know that Macron has stated that several times and not elaborated why, because I think Ukraine's idea is, or Zelensky's idea is, if he could fast track to membership, then he would have the protection of the European Union to whatever capacity it's able to protect with its still forming army. And I know the EU has just thrown a good deal of weaponry, but I think that's kind of what Zelensky was hoping, or it I don't know if he felt that by becoming a member sooner, he might come under the NATO umbrella.
Yes, because once a country is a member of the European Union, all the other countries are compelled to help that country militarily and go to war with that country. And that is not the present project of the European Union. We are not co-belligerents.
Right. Now you work along with the EPP. Is that correct? Or do you work along with other parties within the EU, or just the EPP?
With all parties, but we are closer to the EPP than to others because two of our presidents, the president of Germany and Otto von Habsburg, the late Otto von Habsburg, were members of the EPP.
Oh, okay.
They were members of the Parliament, of the European Parliament, within the EPP.
I wasn't aware that Habsburg was a member of the EPP. I knew he was a member, he was an MEP for a long time. Now, my next question is, the European Union is punching up to its weight. It's rewriting the rules for the world through its Digital Services Act and other policy areas. It's working on its strategic compass to compete its army. It's working on a capital markets union, banking union that's earmarking the euro as a major global reserve currency. In addition to its 84 trade pacts, it will be working on adding one with India. Finally, it has just convened the Conference on the Future of Europe and will enact many changes to it to make it a democratic political empire. Now, Europe has let it be known it's out for its own interests, as did India and, of course, Russia. Where do you see the EU in 5 years, and where do you see the US and Russia?
Well, first of all, in order to become a democratic political empire, as you just said, the EU ought to become a democracy and not just a technocratic and authoritarian commission as it is now. It ought to broaden the conditions for the European Citizens Initiative, allow referendums, and at least give real power to the European Parliament, which is currently only a registration room. So this is where I wish to see the EU in 5 or in 10 years. Now concerning the USA, I wish to see the USA get rid of at least neutralize the American hawks of the military-industrial complex and the political and financial lobbies within the next 5 years. Concerning Russia, I wish them to renounce their detestable policy of lying and brutality. But all these wishes may just be wishful thinking, because most of the time in history, at the end of the day, geopolitics usually have the last word. From this point of view, I'm somewhat surprised that the Chinese have not yet thrown themselves on the throat of the Russians to seize Siberia, taking advantage of their current stalemate in the Ukraine.
Interesting point. I want to ask you, when you mentioned about the European Union and it being undemocratic, it has just concluded this whole plenary sessions so that they could enact changes, the Conference on the Future of Europe. And apparently there's like over 300 changes that are coming. Have you had a chance to look some of those over? And do you feel that it's going to lend the democratic legitimacy that the Union is lacking? And I agree with you there. The European Union is an undemocratic institution, or it's an undemocratic empire, and it needs more democratic legitimacy. But are you aware of any of those, or shall we make that the topic for another interview? And we can
yes,
go.
It could be a topic for another interview. But little by little, there is some progress, but little by little, very slowly.
I've looked it over briefly.
I beg your pardon?
Looking it over briefly, it looks as if the European Parliament is going to be given some more powers. I'm not sure how much, but some more. And there's going to be some voting procedure for the MEPs on transnational lists where the nations can vote for different MEPs, and something about the process of the Commission president will be a little bit more in line, but it's a pretty long document, so I have to give some more time. But my first impression, Christian, is I'm not really sure it's going to give the legitimacy that I would be looking to see, or that you're looking to see. I'm not sure that it's going to go enough, although they are eliminating the unanimity rule, which keeps the Union from going forward.
People of the European Union, this is why there is a misunderstanding. This problem, the Europeans to consider themselves as really citizens of the EU.
Yes. Again, that'll be a great topic for another interview, is to really look at those changes and discuss some of them, because there's quite a few. And then finally, the final question is, what is your view of the European Union's policy with Russia and it becoming like the United States in using their currency, which is the euro, as a weapon to sanction Russia to death? And I say sanction to death because I don't know They've just issued more sanctions. I'm not sure how many more sanctions you can keep issuing. There's almost none left, and yet it still keeps going forward. What are the concerns of the French versus other members of the European Union? In addition to that question, what are the concerns of the French versus other members of the EU? And are you in agreement with Macron's endeavors to stop this war? And how would Pan-Europa approach this conflict? So let's look at the first piece of this, which is, what is your view of the EU's sanction policy?
Well, to put it in a nutshell, I would say that the sanctions will cost a dear price to the Europeans, almost as much as to the Russians. That's quite sure, because we are very much dependent on Russian commodities and energy. But the EU's policy with Russia is a very sad one, and both sides are responsible for the present mess. When the Iron Curtain fell down with the Berlin Wall in 1989, we could have built our dream of a pan-Europe from San Francisco to Vladivostok, because Mikhail Gorbachev allowed the reunification of Germany against some guarantees of safety for Russia. He even went to Washington begging for financial support. The financial help was refused to him with only an insulting tip, and the military guarantees for Russia have been trampled by NATO, who did not stop from encircling Russia with strategic missiles, all pointed at her. So when he came to power in 1999, Vladimir Putin was pro-Western as Gorbachev in his time. But during the next 15 years, until 2014, he reached out at least 3 times to the EU and to NATO in order to obtain a cooperation agreement that was always refused to him. The answer of the West to his third humiliating attempt was the Maidan revolution in Kiev, organized by an employee of Mr. who's director of the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the German Secret Service, and another important person who was Mr. James Wolseley, ex-director of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, in the mid-1990s. We all know what happened after Maidan, the Minsk agreements, which were never respected by any of the signatory parties, the annexation of Crimea by Russia, and the 8 years of non-stop bombing of the Donbas Russian-speaking Ukrainians who were denied the right to use the Russian language and who were only asking for an autonomous recognition within the Ukraine and not even dreaming of independence. So instead of calming the nationalist aspirations of the Russians and Ukrainians by encouraging them to respect the Minsk agreements, every effort has been made to stir up ancestral hatred among them. Why is that so? The answer is because the soil and the subsoil of Russia and Ukraine make them the 2 richest countries in the world, with all the possible crops and commodities and rare metals and strategic metals. That some birds of prey in the West intend to seize once the 2 countries are mutually destroyed and immensely indebted. So until February 2022, Putin had been a skillful chess player and a cold-blooded judo champion. But when he became angry and responded to all, he invaded the Ukraine and committed a great mistake that, in my opinion, will be fatal to him sooner or later. Now we have no choice but to support the Ukrainians militarily against him. And so the Ukrainians and the Russians are from now on being used as cannon fodder for the greatest benefit of the birds of prey in the West. Just now, let us hope that the heroic military of the Azov Battalion and this 36th Brigade of Ukrainian Naval Infantry in the Azovstal complex in Mariupol will survive, as well as the poor Russian-speaking populations in the Donbass. That's my view of the European-Russian relationship presently.
It's interesting that you would say that, because that's what I've been saying on the show, is that it's really a land grab, meaning it's under this smokescreen of democracy, but yet the European Union is not really democratic. Neither is the US right now. We've got cancel culture and other issues within the United States that you have to wonder about our own democracy. But it's this smokescreen of democracy, but yet it seems that there's a lot of vested interests that involve money and agreements. But I have a question. Why was Russia refused? And I've heard Sergei Lavrov state that they approached the Europeans. They wanted to be part of the association agreement with the Ukraine and the EU and were refused. Why did Europe refuse Russia that agreement in enlisting Russia? That would have seemed to have made really good economic sense for the European Union. And the European Union is built on this idea of unity preventing wars. If they had included Russia in that type of an agreement, it would have prevented this.
Absolutely, absolutely. But unfortunately, some birds of prey prefer to use both populations of Russia and the Ukraine as cannon fodder in order to come after the war and rebuild at least the Ukraine, maybe also some parts of Russia, and indebt those countries and ask them for guarantees with energy, with gas and oil energy and their rare metals, etc., and all the riches of those two very, very, very rich countries, richer than the USA and much richer than Europe.
So what you're saying is that it's not just what makes political sense, but whoever pockets are being lined through these various companies. That's the bottom line, isn't it? The birds of prey.
Unfortunately.
Well, I think we're running out of time. So I'm going to conclude our interview, Christian, but this was very informative and would love to have you back discussing the agreement, this conference on the future of Europe and the changes, the treaty changes that will be coming. That would be a great topic. I want to thank you for coming on today. It was very, very informative, and we are running out of time. So I'm going to end this right now.